September 17th, 1944, Aachen, Germany. The sound of artillery echoed through the narrow streets as American armored units approached the first major German city to face invasion. In a command post near the Belgian border, U.S. tank commanders reviewed intelligence reports detailing formidable German defenses, Panzer IVs, Panthers, and the dreaded 88mm anti-tank guns that had carved through Sherman tanks across France. The M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman, recently arrived from American factories, stood among the standard Shermans, externally identical save for its noticeably thicker armor plating. German tank crews, veterans of the Eastern and Western fronts, had grown accustomed to penetrating American armor with relative ease. Their 75mm guns had proven more than adequate against previous Sherman variants. Yet within weeks, these same crews would file urgent reports to their commanders. Rounds deflecting harmlessly off American tanks they assumed would be easy prey. The Jumbo had arrived, and the calculations of urban warfare were about to change. Late summer 1944 marked a pivotal moment in the European theater. Allied forces had successfully broken through German defenses at Normandy, but the advance toward the Rhine revealed a persistent problem. American armor remained vulnerable to German anti-tank weapons. The standard M4 Sherman, with frontal armor ranging from 51mm to 63mm, had earned a grim reputation among crews who understood their chances against German guns. The 75mm KWK-40 mounted on Panzer IVs could penetrate Sherman armor at combat ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42, with its higher velocity, proved even more lethal. American tank crews developed tactics emphasizing speed and numbers over protection, but casualties mounted steadily. The Fisher Tank Division in Grand Blanc, Michigan, received specifications for an unusual variant in early 1944. Engineers reinforced the M4A3 chassis with additional armor plating, bringing frontal protection to 102mm on the hull and an extraordinary 152mm on the mantlet and turret front. The glacis plate, sloped at 47 degrees, provided effective thickness exceeding 150mm against direct fire. Side armor increased from 38mm to 76mm. The total weight rose to 42 tons, compared to the standard Sherman's 33 tons. To compensate, the suspension received strengthened components, and the transmission was reinforced. The 75mm M3 gun remained the primary armament, a decision that prioritized the tank's intended role as an assault vehicle rather than a tank destroyer. Production began in June 1944. The Grand Blanc facility manufactured the first Jumbos, alongside standard Sherman variants, using existing assembly processes with modifications for the heavier components. Workers installed the thicker armor plates using the same welding techniques that had proven effective on earlier models. The additional weight required no fundamental redesign of the hull structure. Engineers had calculated that the M4A3 chassis could accommodate the reinforcement without compromising mechanical reliability. By August, the first Jumbos were crated and shipped to European depots. Total production reached only 254 units before the war's end, a tiny fraction of the approximately 50,000 Shermans manufactured during the conflict. The limited production numbers reflected the Jumbo's specialized purpose. U.S. Army doctrine did not envision the vehicle as a main battle tank, but rather as a breakthrough weapon for urban combat and fortified positions. Each armored division typically received a small number of Jumbos to supplement standard Sherman battalions. The 3rd and 4th Armored Divisions were among the first units to receive the new variant in September 1944. Tank commanders initially viewed the Jumbo with curiosity rather than enthusiasm. The 75mm gun seemed inadequate for a tank weighing more than a German Panther. The reduced speed, maximum 22 miles per hour compared to the standard Sherman's 30 miles per hour, appeared to contradict American tactical doctrine emphasizing mobility. Few realized that within weeks these heavy Shermans would demonstrate their worth in the crucible of urban warfare that awaited in Western Germany. Aachen's significance extended beyond geography. As the first major German city to face Allied invasion, its defense carried enormous symbolic weight for both sides. The medieval city center, surrounded by industrial suburbs and fortifications dating to various periods, presented ideal terrain for determined defenders. Buildings constructed of thick masonry provided excellent cover for anti-tank guns. Narrow streets channeled attacking forces into predictable avenues of approach. German forces had months to prepare defensive positions, mining approach routes, and positioning artillery to cover key intersections. The 1st Infantry Division, supported by elements of the 3rd Armored Division, received orders to reduce Aachen in October 1944. Initial reconnaissance revealed extensive German preparations. Panzer IVs and assault guns occupied concealed positions throughout the city. The 246th Volksgrenadier Division and remnants of the 116th Panzer Division manned defensive positions with orders to hold at all costs. American intelligence estimated German strength at approximately 5,000 defenders with substantial armor support. The urban environment negated many advantages of American air power and artillery, forcing infantry and armor to fight building by building. Standard Sherman tanks proved vulnerable in the confined spaces of urban combat. German defenders positioned 75mm anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts at close range, where even modest weapons could penetrate Sherman armor. The Americans lost multiple tanks during initial probing attacks. Crews reported that German rounds penetrated frontal armor from surprisingly short ranges, sometimes less than 200 meters, in situations where buildings prevented tactical maneuvering. The psychological impact on tank crews was significant. Operating in urban terrain without adequate protection against close-range threats undermined morale and effectiveness. The Jumbo entered combat at Aachen during the 2nd week of October. Company commanders assigned the heavily armored Shermans to lead assault elements, with standard tanks following in support. The tactical logic was straightforward. Jumbos would absorb the initial German fire, allowing lighter tanks and infantry to advance under their protection. The first engagement occurred on October 13th near the Aachen-Lorenzburg district. A jumbo from the 3rd Armored Division advanced along Monheim-Saale, a wide boulevard offering German anti-tank guns excellent fields of fire. A concealed Panzer IV fired 3 rounds at a range of approximately 400 meters. All 3 rounds struck the jumbo's frontal armor. None penetrated. The Sherman continued advancing, returning fire, and forcing the German tank to withdraw. German after-action reports from Aachen reveal confusion regarding American tank capabilities. A report from elements of the 116th Panzer Division, dated October 15, 1944, described encounters with Sherman tanks of unusual resistance to anti-tank fire. The report noted multiple instances where 75mm armor-piercing rounds failed to penetrate what appeared to be standard American tanks. German tank commanders, accustomed to calculating engagement ranges based on known Sherman armor thickness, found their tactical assumptions invalidated. The Panzergranate 39, a hardened steel projectile capable of penetrating 82mm of vertical armor at 500 meters, should have easily defeated the standard Sherman's 51mm frontal plate. Against the Jumbo's 102mm hull armor and 152mm turret face, the same round proved ineffective at combat ranges. American armored doctrine in 1944 reflected lessons learned across North Africa, Italy, and the early campaigns in France. Field Manual 17-33 emphasized speed, firepower, and coordinated action between tanks, infantry, and supporting arms. The manual devoted relatively little attention to urban combat, viewing cities as obstacles to be bypassed rather than objectives requiring direct assault. Tank commanders received training focused on open terrain warfare where American advantages in mobility and numbers could be exploited fully. The heavy, slow-moving jumbo appeared to contradict these principles, representing a specialized tool rather than a main-line weapon. The Battle of Aachen forced rapid tactical adaptation. By mid-October, commanders recognized that standard Sherman tactics proved ineffective in urban environments. The practice of using tanks as mobile fire support for infantry exposed them to devastating short-range fire. Buildings prevented the flanking maneuvers that American doctrine emphasized. The solution emerged organically from frontline units. Concentrate the available jumbos at the point of attack, using their superior protection to break through German strongpoints, while standard Shermans provided covering fire from concealed positions. Captain James Burt of the 3rd Armored Division implemented this approach systematically during operations in Aachen. Burt commanded Company B, 66th Armored Regiment, which included 2 jumbo tanks among its standard Sherman platoons. After observing the jumbo's resilience during initial engagements, Burt assigned them to lead all assault operations through the city. The heavily armored tanks would advance directly down streets under fire, drawing German anti-tank weapons' attention, while lighter tanks maneuvered to flanking positions. Infantry followed immediately behind the jumbos, using them as mobile cover. The tactic worked. German defenders found themselves engaged by targets they could not effectively damage, while American infantry closed to assault range under armored protection. The psychological impact extended beyond tactical success. German defenders had grown accustomed to their ability to destroy American armor with available anti-tank weapons. The appearance of Shermans that shrugged off 75mm rounds challenged that assumption. German intelligence struggled to explain the phenomenon. Initial reports suggested the Americans had developed new armor metallurgy, or applique plates. The truth that the jumbo represented a purpose-built assault variant produced in limited numbers remained unclear to German commanders until war's end. This uncertainty contributed to tactical paralysis. German units could not reliably predict which American tanks possessed enhanced protection, complicating target selection and engagement planning. By late October, as Aachen fell to American forces after 3 weeks of intense fighting, the jumbo's value had been conclusively demonstrated. Reports from the 1st Infantry Division documented instances where individual jumbos absorbed dozens of direct hits without significant damage. One jumbo from the 3rd Armored Division, damaged and recovered after the battle, showed evidence of 75 impacts on its frontal armor. None had penetrated. These statistics represented more than technical achievement. They translated directly to crew survival and tactical success. The soldiers who operated these machines understood that the extra tons of steel meant the difference between life and death in urban warfare's close quarters. The question facing American commanders was how to produce and distribute more jumbos to units facing similar challenges in the advance toward Germany's industrial heartland. German tank design philosophy in 1944 reflected years of Eastern Front experience. The Panzer IV, mounting the 75mm KWK-40L-48 gun, represented mature technology, optimized for the ranges and conditions of typical tank combat. The weapon could penetrate 82mm of vertical armor at 500 meters using standard Panzergranate 39 ammunition, more than adequate against the Soviet T-34's 45mm frontal armor or the standard Sherman's 51mm plate. German production prioritized quantity and reliability over incremental improvements. Factories produced approximately 3,000 Panzer P4s in 1944, maintaining supply to units facing multi-front warfare. The jumbo presented an unexpected challenge to this calculus. At typical urban combat ranges of 200 to 400 meters, where German tanks encountered American armor in Western Germany's cities, the KWK-40 could not reliably penetrate the jumbo's frontal armor. The mathematics were straightforward. The Panzergranate 39 achieved penetration of approximately 92mm of vertical armor at 300 meters. The jumbo's turret mantlet, at 152mm thickness, exceeded this by a significant margin. Even against the 102mm hull front, penetration became uncertain at angles or ranges beyond point-blank distances. German tank crews found themselves in situations where they could achieve first-hit advantage yet failed to disable their target, a reversal of the tactical situation that had prevailed throughout most of 1944. German tactical adaptation followed predictable patterns. Unit commanders emphasized concentration of fire, directing multiple tanks to engage single jumbo targets. This approach sometimes succeeded, as volume of fire increased the probability of hits on weaker points, side armor, track assemblies, or vision blocks. However, it required coordination that proved difficult in the chaos of urban combat. Alternative tactics included attempting to maneuver for flank shots, but American combined arms doctrine typically provided infantry support that prevented German tanks from achieving favorable positions without exposing themselves to bazookas or supporting American armor. The 88mm gun offered a solution, but one with significant limitations. The KWK-36L56, mounted on Tiger tanks, and the KWK-43L71 on King Tigers, could defeat jumbo armor at standard combat ranges. The 88mm Panzergranate 39-43 could penetrate 165mm of vertical armor at 500 meters, sufficient to threaten even the jumbo's heavy mantlet. However, Tiger tanks remained scarce in late 1944. Total Tiger Fun production never exceeded 1,350 units, and by autumn 1944, losses had reduced operational numbers significantly. The Tiger II entered service too late and in too few numbers, only 489 produced total, to affect the tactical situation meaningfully. German units facing American armor in Western Germany typically fielded Panzer IVs and assault guns, not Tigers. German quartermaster reports from November 1944 reveal the Wehrmacht's deteriorating material situation. Tank production struggled to replace losses. Approximately 300 Panthers and 250 Panzer IV-4s reached frontline units monthly, while combat losses and mechanical breakdowns removed similar or greater numbers from service. Fuel shortages restricted training and operational movement. In this context, encountering American tanks requiring scarce 88mm guns or multiple standard tank engagements to defeat represented a tactical problem without adequate solution. The jumbo, though produced in small numbers, exerted influence disproportionate to its deployment scale by forcing German units to expend resources and tactics designed for more numerous standard Shermans. The disparity between American and German tank production in late 1944 was staggering. U.S. factories produced approximately 1,500 Sherman variants monthly during this period, compared to Germany's combined production of approximately 550 Panthers, Panzerpowers, and assault guns. This numerical advantage extended beyond simple quantity to encompass logistics, spare parts, and replacement capacity. An American armored division could expect regular deliveries of replacement tanks and components. German units often operated with incomplete establishments, cannibalizing damaged vehicles for parts to keep remaining tanks operational. The jumbo's limited production numbers reflected deliberate choices rather than industrial constraints. The Grand Blanc arsenal possessed capacity to manufacture more jumbos had military requirements demanded it. The decision to limit production to 254 units between June and September 1944 indicated that Army ground forces viewed the variant as a specialized tool for specific situations rather than a universal replacement for standard Shermans. Each jumbo cost approximately 10,000 man-hours to produce, roughly 20% more than a standard Sherman due to the additional armor fabrication and installation. The weight of extra armor also increased shipping costs and complicated logistics. For every jumbo produced, the same resources could yield multiple standard Shermans that met requirements for the majority of tactical situations. Distribution patterns reflected the jumbo's intended purpose. The 3rd Armored Division received approximately 20 jumbos by October 1944, distributed among its tank battalions with concentration in units assigned assault missions. The 4th Armored Division received similar numbers. Other armored divisions received smaller allocations or none at all, depending on their operational assignments and anticipated combat environments. This selective distribution meant that most Sherman crews never encountered a jumbo, while units engaged in urban warfare in Western Germany came to regard them as essential assets. Maintenance and repair presented unique challenges. The jumbo's additional weight stressed suspension components and transmissions beyond standard Sherman tolerances. Track wear increased significantly due to the extra load. Maintenance personnel found that jumbos required more frequent attention to suspension elements and running gear. However, the fundamental mechanical similarity to standard Shermans meant that existing supply chains and maintenance procedures could support jumbo operations without developing entirely new systems. This mechanical commonality represented sound design. Exotic vehicles requiring specialized support posed logistical problems that outweighed their tactical benefits. The contrast with German armor production illuminated broader strategic realities. German factories produced technically sophisticated vehicles. The Panther and Tiger represented some of the war's finest tank designs. However, complexity imposed costs. A Panther required approximately 150,000 man-hours to produce, compared to 10,000 for a standard Sherman. This ratio meant that American industry could replace losses faster than German forces could inflict them, even accounting for the Panther's superior combat capabilities. The jumbo represented an American approach to the quality versus quantity debate. Maintain high production volumes of adequate designs while creating specialized variants for specific challenges. This strategy proved sustainable across multiple theaters against enemies with sophisticated military industries of their own. The jumbo's effectiveness derived not from armor alone, but from its integration into American combined arms doctrine. U.S. Army tactical organizations emphasized coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support. This system, refined through campaigns in North Africa, Italy, and France, provided the framework within which the jumbo operated. The heavily armored tank served as one component of a larger tactical system, enabling infantry advances and providing the armored spearhead for combined operations. A typical assault operation in November 1944 illustrated this integration. During the approach to Cologne, the 3rd Armored Division planned an attack on a fortified German position, blocking the main approach route. The plan called for artillery preparation, followed by a jumbo-led armored assault supported by infantry and tank destroyers. At H hour, American artillery delivered a 15-minute preparation on known German positions. As the barrage lifted, Two jumbos advanced along the main axis, with four standard Shermans following in staggered formation. Infantry squads moved behind the tanks, using them as mobile cover. Tank destroyers positioned on the flanks provided overwatch, ready to engage German armor attempting to maneuver against the assault force. German defenders opened fire as the jumbos crossed the line of departure. Multiple hits struck the lead tank's frontal armor without effect. The jumbo continued advancing, returning fire with its 75mm gun against identified German positions. This suppressive fire, while unlikely to penetrate German tank armor at range, forced German crews to button up and limited their ability to engage effectively. The standard Shermans, moving in the jumbo's wake, engaged targets of opportunity, infantry positions, anti-tank guns, and buildings suspected of harboring observers. Infantry followed immediately behind the tanks, ready to clear buildings and secure ground once armored vehicles broke through the main German line. Communication proved critical to this coordination. Each American tank carried the SCR-538 radio, enabling real-time communication between vehicles and with supporting infantry. Tank commanders could call for artillery support, direct airstrikes, or coordinate maneuvers with adjacent units. This communications capability meant that a jumbo commander could report a German strongpoint and have artillery fire on it within minutes. The integration of radio communication with tactical doctrine represented a significant American advantage over German forces, who often struggled with more limited communication systems and less emphasis on combined arms coordination at lower tactical levels. The tactical success of jumbo-led operations depended on this systematic approach. Isolated heavy tanks, no matter how well protected, remained vulnerable to determined infantry with anti-tank weapons or to being bypassed and surrounded. American doctrine prevented these vulnerabilities through constant coordination with infantry and mutual support between armored vehicles. The jumbo's role as a breakthrough weapon required an entire tactical system to support it: artillery to suppress German defenses, infantry to clear positions once penetrated, and supporting armor to exploit breaches created by the heavily armored assault tanks. This integration of specialized equipment into a coherent tactical system exemplified American operational art in late 1944. Statistics and armor thickness calculations obscured the human reality of tank warfare. Each Sherman crew consisted of 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, who lived, fought, and often died together in a confined steel box. The interior of a Sherman tank measured approximately 7 feet wide and 19 feet long, with standing room limited to areas beneath the turret. In winter, crews froze. In summer, temperatures inside exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The smell of oil, cordite, and human sweat permeated everything. Combat meant deafening noise from the engine, gun, and enemy impacts, noise that could render men temporarily or permanently deaf. Jumbo crews experienced the same discomforts as their counterparts in standard Shermans. But with an additional psychological burden, they knew they would be assigned to lead assaults. The extra armor that protected them also marked them for the most dangerous missions. Commanders placed jumbos at the point of attack specifically because they could survive concentrated fire. This meant that jumbo crews faced more frequent combat than crews of standard tanks, which often operated in supporting roles. The trade-off between increased protection and increased exposure to danger defined the jumbo crew experience. Personal accounts from jumbo crews reveal this complex psychology. Sergeant Erling Poole of the 14th Armored Division described the experience. "You knew when you climbed into that jumbo you were going first every time. That's what it was for. But you also knew that when the rounds started coming, you had a better chance than the other guys. You could hear them bouncing off. That sound like someone hitting the hull with a sledgehammer. You got used to it. The first time you think you're dead. After a while you almost don't notice." Poole's account captured the duality of jumbo service: greater danger offset by greater protection. The extra armor could not prevent all casualties. Penetrations of side or rear armor, catastrophic mechanical failures, or hits on vulnerable points like vision blocks still killed jumbo crews. Mines remained deadly, regardless of frontal armor thickness. Artillery and infantry anti-tank weapons continued to pose threats. The jumbo reduced risk, but did not eliminate it. Nevertheless, casualty statistics showed measurable differences. Data from the 3rd Armored Division indicated that jumbo crews suffered approximately 40% fewer casualties per engagement than crews of standard Shermans during operations in urban terrain. This difference represented dozens of lives saved across the units that operated the heavily armored variants. The psychological impact of surviving hits that would have destroyed standard tanks influenced crew morale profoundly. Tankers in standard Shermans often approached combat with fatalistic acceptance of their vulnerability. Jumbo crews, while still facing significant danger, operated with greater confidence. This confidence translated to tactical effectiveness. Crews willing to advance under fire accomplished missions that more cautious crews might have approached more slowly or not at all. The extra armor's psychological effect thus multiplied its tactical value, creating advantages beyond the purely physical protection the steel plates provided. In the intimate confines of the tank, where 5 men depended absolutely on each other's skill and courage, this psychological dimension proved as important as armor thickness or gun caliber. The Hurtgen Forest Offensive illustrated that even the Jumbo's substantial armor could not overcome every tactical challenge. The densely wooded terrain southeast of Aachen presented conditions fundamentally different from urban combat. Narrow forest trails limited maneuver. Trees prevented mutual support between vehicles. Mines, artillery, and infantry anti-tank weapons dominated an environment where armor's advantages diminished significantly. The U.S. Army's costly campaign through the Hurtgen from September through December 1944 resulted in approximately 33,000 casualties for limited territorial gains. Jumbos participated in Hurtgen operations but found their capabilities constrained by terrain. The heavily armored tanks could not lead advances through forest trails barely wider than the vehicles themselves. German defenders positioned anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts to fire from close range, where even the Jumbo's frontal armor provided limited advantage. The forest canopy prevented effective artillery support and air reconnaissance. American tanks, whether Jumbos or standard Shermans, advanced slowly, if at all, through terrain that favored infantry and defensive tactics. The experience highlighted the specialized nature of the Jumbo's design. In open terrain or urban environments where tanks could maneuver and bring their weapons to bear, the extra armor provided decisive advantages. In the Hurtgen's claustrophobic forest trails, these advantages diminished. The reduced speed that resulted from the Jumbo's additional weight became a liability in situations requiring rapid movement or extraction. The 75mm gun, adequate for engaging German positions in urban combat, lacked the range and penetrating power needed for long-range engagements in the few open areas the forest offered. American tactical doctrine adjusted accordingly. Commanders learned to match vehicle capabilities to terrain and tactical situations. Jumbos concentrated in units preparing for urban operations or breakthrough missions in relatively open terrain. Tank destroyers and standard Shermans took priority for operations in heavily wooded areas, where their lighter weight and greater mobility provided advantages. This flexible approach to armor employment reflected the U.S. Army's growing sophistication in European operations, moving beyond doctrine toward practical adaptation based on experience. By late November, American forces had cleared Aachen and advanced toward the Roer River despite the costly Hurtgen fighting. The strategic situation suggested that future operations would involve urban combat in Germany's industrial cities, precisely the environment where the Jumbo excelled. Cologne, Germany's fourth-largest city, lay ahead. With a pre-war population exceeding 750,000, extensive industrial facilities, and the Rhine River as its eastern boundary, Cologne represented a major military objective and a tactical challenge ideal for the Jumbo's capabilities. The lessons learned at Aachen would be applied again at larger scale in the coming months. Cologne represented the culmination of combined arms doctrine refined through months of urban combat. The city's capture between February and March 1945 demonstrated how American forces had learned to integrate Jumbo capabilities into systematic operations. The 3rd Armored Division, now experienced in urban warfare, planned its approach to exploit the heavily armored Sherman's strengths while minimizing its limitations. The result was a campaign that secured a major German city with lower casualties than earlier urban battles had produced. The attack began on March 5, 1945, with artillery preparation and airstrikes against known German positions. Elements of the 3rd Armored Division approached from the west and southwest, with Jumbos assigned to lead assault columns along major avenues. German defenders, including elements of the 9th Panzer Division and various Volkssturm units, had prepared defensive positions throughout the city. However, by March 1945, German material superiority had evaporated. Fuel shortages limited tank movement. Ammunition supplies remained adequate but not abundant. Most significantly, German defenders understood they faced an enemy with overwhelming material and numerical advantages. A specific engagement on March 6th illustrated the Jumbo's role in the Cologne operation. Task Force X, built around a company of Shermans including 3 Jumbos, advanced along Aachener Strasse toward the city center. German forces had prepared defensive positions at key intersections, with anti-tank guns positioned to fire down the long straight sections typical of German urban planning. As the lead Jumbo rounded a corner, A concealed Panzer IV fired at a range of approximately 350 meters. The round struck the jumbo's turret mantle and deflected upward without penetrating. The jumbo's return fire, while not penetrating the Panzer's frontal armor, forced it to withdraw. Supporting Shermans maneuvered to flanking positions and engaged the German tank from multiple angles, achieving a mobility kill that stopped its retreat. The pattern repeated throughout Cologne. Jumbos absorbed initial German fire, allowing American forces to identify enemy positions and bring overwhelming firepower to bear. Infantry followed the armored spearheads, clearing buildings and securing positions. Artillery responded rapidly to calls for fire support. By March 7th, American forces had reached the Rhine, and organized German resistance within Cologne had collapsed. The famous photograph of an M26 Pershing tank engaging a German Panther near Cologne Cathedral captured the campaign's final moments. But the systematic reduction of German positions had been accomplished primarily by Shermans, including the jumbos that led the most difficult assaults. German casualty and equipment loss figures from Cologne reflected the disparity in forces. American intelligence estimated German losses at over 5,000 casualties and dozens of tanks and assault guns destroyed or captured. American losses, while significant, remained substantially lower than German casualties, a reversal of the typical urban warfare pattern where defenders enjoyed significant advantages. The difference derived from multiple factors, but the ability to advance armored vehicles through defended streets with acceptable losses proved crucial. The jumbo's contribution to this capability, though representing a small fraction of total American armor, influenced operations beyond its numbers by enabling tactics that would have been suicidal with standard Shermans alone. By March 1945, Germany's strategic situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. Soviet forces approached Berlin from the east. Western Allies controlled territory west of the Rhine. Allied air supremacy prevented German movement during daylight hours. Most significantly, Germany's industrial capacity had collapsed under sustained strategic bombing and loss of resource areas. Tank production fell to fewer than 100 units monthly. Fuel supplies reached critically low levels. Many German armored vehicles remained immobilized for lack of gasoline. The Wehrmacht fought on, but material constraints increasingly determined tactical outcomes. American material advantages, always substantial, became overwhelming. Sherman production continued at high rates even as victory approached. The U.S. Army fielded approximately 20,000 tanks in Europe by early 1945, compared to German operational strength estimated at fewer than 2,000 tanks and assault guns across all fronts. American logistics ensured that frontline units received fuel, ammunition, and replacement vehicles promptly. German units increasingly operated with partial establishments, short of fuel, ammunition, and trained personnel. In this context, even modest technological advantages like the jumbo's extra armor multiplied in significance because German forces lacked resources to counter them effectively. The jumbo's combat record must be understood within this strategic context. Its success derived partly from excellent design. The armor scheme proved effective, and the vehicle maintained mechanical reliability despite increased weight. However, success also reflected the broader material superiority that American forces enjoyed by late 1944 and early 1945. A German Panther, in theory superior to the jumbo in armor and firepower, lost much of its advantage when it lacked fuel to maneuver, ammunition for sustained engagements, or trained crews to operate it effectively. The jumbo, supported by American logistics and production capacity, operated consistently at full capability, while German counterparts struggled with shortages that compromised even excellent equipment. This broader perspective reveals important lessons about military technology and strategy. Technical specifications, armor thickness, gun penetration, engine horsepower matter significantly in determining tactical outcomes. However, they operate within strategic contexts that can amplify or diminish their importance. The T-34 proved decisive on the Eastern Front, not because it was technically superior to German tanks in all respects, but because Soviet industry produced it in quantities that overwhelmed German forces despite German technical sophistication. Similarly, the Sherman, including the jumbo variant, contributed to Allied victory through a combination of adequate technical characteristics, massive production scale, and integration into effective combined arms doctrine. The question of whether the United States should have produced more jumbos admits no simple answer. The 254 units manufactured proved sufficient for the specialized role envisioned by Army planners. Had production continued, perhaps several thousand jumbos could have reached European units by war's end. These additional heavily armored tanks might have reduced American casualties in urban conflict combat and assault operations. However, they would have competed with standard Sherman production for resources and factory capacity. The calculus involved trade-offs between specialized capability and numerical strength, trade-offs that American military planners navigated successfully by producing both types in proportions that matched operational requirements. The final months of the European War saw continued jumbo operations across the shrinking German perimeter. American forces advanced through central Germany toward link-up with Soviet forces approaching from the east. Urban combat continued, though German resistance weakened as supplies and organized command structures collapsed. Jumbos participated in operations to secure cities along the advance routes. Kassel, Leipzig, Dessau, performing the same assault role they had pioneered at Aachen and refined at Cologne. Post-battle assessments of jumbo performance confirmed their tactical value. Armor intelligence reports examined jumbos recovered after combat, documenting impact patterns and penetration attempts. These studies revealed consistent patterns. Most hits struck frontal armor, reflecting the jumbo's role in leading assaults. The majority of impacts failed to penetrate, validating the armor scheme's design. Side and rear hits remained dangerous, but the distribution of impact suggested that most engagements occurred with the jumbo facing German positions, exactly the tactical situation for which it was designed. Statistical analysis comparing jumbo and standard Sherman losses provided quantitative assessment of the extra armor's value. Data from the 3rd Armored Division showed that jumbos suffered total losses, destroyed or irreparably damaged, at rates approximately 60% lower than standard Shermans when engaged in similar operations. This difference persisted even accounting for the jumbo's assignment to assault missions, which typically involved higher combat intensity than supporting roles. The implication was clear: the additional armor reduced vulnerability significantly enough to offset the increased exposure from leading attacks. Crew survival rates told a similar story. Jumbo crews evacuated safely from damaged vehicles at rates substantially higher than crews of standard Shermans. This difference reflected the armor's ability to prevent catastrophic penetrations that killed crews instantly or prevented evacuation. Even when jumbos suffered mobility kills from mechanical failure or track damage, crew survival remained high because the hull armor protected occupants from secondary attacks. For the men who crewed these machines, the extra armor translated directly to increased probability of survival, a difference measured not in abstract statistics but in lives saved. The jumbo's limited production run and specialized role meant it never achieved the fame of more numerous Sherman variants or German heavy tanks. Historians writing about World War II armor often mention it briefly, if at all. Veterans who served in other Sherman variants sometimes expressed surprise when learning of the jumbo's existence. Yet for the units that operated these tanks, and the men who crewed them, the jumbo represented a crucial capability that enabled operations otherwise impossible or prohibitively costly. The urban battles of late 1944 and early 1945 would have proceeded differently, and at higher cost, without the heavily armored assault tanks that led American advances through defended cities. Artifact: Post-War Ordnance Department Memorandum on Heavy Tank Development. Documentation showing how jumbo experience influenced subsequent American armor design philosophy. The war's end brought immediate changes to American armor development. With combat operations concluded, the Army assessed lessons learned and planned future equipment. The Sherman family, including the jumbo, represented successful wartime production, but also highlighted limitations. The appearance of heavier German tanks had challenged American armor throughout 1944 to 1945, even if material and numerical advantages ultimately prevailed. Post-war planning emphasized developing tanks capable of engaging Soviet armor if Cold War tensions escalated to conflict. The jumbo influenced this planning process indirectly. Ordnance Department studies of wartime operations noted the value of heavily armored assault variants for specific and tactical situations. However, they also recognized limitations. The extra weight reduced mobility, complicating logistics and limiting deployment flexibility. The ideal solution would integrate heavy protection with adequate firepower and acceptable mobility, characteristics the jumbo achieved imperfectly due to its origin as a Sherman modification rather than original design. The M26 Pershing, which entered combat in limited numbers during the war's final weeks, represented a step toward this ideal. With 100mm frontal armor and a 90mm gun, the Pershing offered capabilities approximating the jumbo's protection with substantially improved firepower. Post-war development led to the M46, M47, and eventually the M48 Patton series, tanks that incorporated lessons from World War II experience, including the jumbo's demonstration of heavy armor's tactical value. These designs reflected understanding that while the Sherman had been adequate for World War II, Future conflicts might require vehicles combining protection, firepower, and mobility in more balanced proportions. The Jumbo's place in armor history remains modest compared to iconic tanks like the Sherman, Panther, or Tiger. Only 254 were built. Their combat service spanned approximately 8 months. Most soldiers who fought in the European theater never saw one. Yet for military historians and armor specialists, the Jumbo represents an important case study in rapid design adaptation and the value of specialized variants within larger equipment families. The ability to modify existing designs to meet emerging requirements, creating the Jumbo without disrupting Sherman production, demonstrated industrial flexibility that contributed significantly to Allied success. Perhaps most significantly, the Jumbo illustrated that effective military equipment results from matching capabilities to specific tactical problems rather than pursuing theoretical perfection. The Jumbo was not a perfect tank. Its 75mm gun limited effectiveness against heavy German armor. The extra weight reduced speed and stressed mechanical components. For most tactical situations, standard Shermans provided better balance of capabilities. But for urban assault operations, where survivability mattered more than mobility or long-range firepower, the Jumbo proved exactly what was needed. This principle, that specialized tools can be more effective than universal designs for specific problems, remains relevant to military equipment development today. Few Jumbos survived the war. Most were scrapped in the massive demobilization that followed Germany's surrender. American occupation forces had no requirement for heavily armored assault tanks. Standard Shermans sufficed for occupation duties, and newer designs replaced the Sherman family in combat units. Some Jumbos remained in service with National Guard units through the late 1940s, but these too were eventually retired as M26 and M46 tanks entered inventory. A handful of Jumbos survived as museum pieces or monuments. The most complete example resides at the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Restored to operational appearance, it stands as a physical reminder of the tank's combat service. Other examples exist at various military museums worldwide, though their rarity means most visitors to armor collections never encounter a Jumbo. For historians and enthusiasts who know the vehicle's history, these survivors represent tangible connections to the urban battles of 1944 to 1945. The men who crewed Jumbos dispersed into civilian life, carrying memories of their service. Some maintained contact through veterans organizations, sharing stories of battles where their extra armor made the difference between survival and death. As years passed and the generation that fought World War II aged, these first-hand accounts became increasingly precious. Oral histories captured some experiences, but many Jumbo veterans' stories were never recorded, lost with the men who lived them. In the broader narrative of World War II, the Jumbo occupies a small space. Histories of the Sherman focus on the more numerous variants, the 75mm M4A1, the 76mm M4A3, the British Firefly. The Jumbo appears as a footnote, if mentioned at all. German heavy tanks received disproportionate attention, their technical sophistication and fearsome reputation ensuring prominent placement in popular accounts of armored warfare. The American heavy tank development remains obscure, known primarily to specialists. Yet the Jumbo's story deserves remembering for what it reveals about effective military adaptation and the human dimensions of technological warfare. The tank represented a practical solution to a specific problem: how to advance armored vehicles through defended urban terrain without suffering prohibitive casualties. American engineers solved this problem not through revolutionary new technology, but by systematically reinforcing an existing design. Commanders learned to employ the Jumbo effectively within combined arms doctrine. Crews operated these machines with skill and courage, accepting increased danger in exchange for increased protection. The result was a weapon that achieved its purpose admirably within a narrow but crucial role. The M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman served from September 1944 to May 1945, participated in major urban operations from Aachen to Cologne and beyond, and contributed to American tactical success during the final campaigns in Western Germany. German crews who watched their rounds bounce off what they assumed were standard American tanks learned painful lessons about assumptions and intelligence failures. American soldiers who followed Jumbo-led assaults understood the value of armor thick enough to absorb hits that would have destroyed lesser vehicles. In 8 months of combat, 254 tanks influenced operations far beyond their numbers, proving that sometimes specialized tools, properly employed, provide solutions that more numerous general-purpose equipment cannot match. The legacy endures in the principles the Jumbo exemplified: adapt existing designs rapidly to meet emerging needs, match specialized equipment to specific tactical problems, integrate technology within broader operational systems, and above all, remember that behind every machine are human beings whose survival depends on the quality of the tools they are given and the doctrine guiding their employment. These lessons, learned at Aachen and Cologne in 1944, remain relevant wherever armored forces face the ancient challenges of urban warfare.